I've spent 10 years as a United States Forest Service Ranger. A couple of my favorite stories both involve fire patrol during the summer months when we were enforcing fire restrictions. The first was a dude at a beautiful area. He was camped next to a lake. About 100 feet from his camp was a giant reflective yellow sign that read, "No camping or fires within a half mile of the lake." When approached and asked if he'd seen the sign, he admitted he saw it. Puzzled, I asked why he was camping there and why he had a campfire. He replied that he admitted seeing it and that he was easily a mile from the lake, so he should be fine. I kicked a stone into the water and informed him that he was only about 10 feet from the lake, and I was going to need his ID, and I was going to issue him a citation. Another time, also in the late night fire patrol, we drove past a designated day-use picnic area. This particular area had fire pits, benches, restrooms, water, and it was well developed. Right outside the picnic area was this old trail that led to a bridge site where the bridge was removed. Due to this, we had placed a Carsonet sign, post, slender brown fiberglass post with information stickers, trail markers, and warnings. This particular post had stickers on it that said the area was closed, no fires, and to stay on the designated trails, and an American flag at the bottom. We roll up to a raging fire at this site. A fire so big and so close to the Carsonet sign that my stickers are literally bubbling and starting to melt due to the heat. Pretty angrily, I asked who wanted to be responsible for this blatant violation. The oldest guy there says he'll take responsibility for the party, follows me to my truck, and proceeds to give me his ID. In his police badge holder, he was a local police officer. I was floored. I gave him a stern lecture about reading signage and ultimately damaging government property. Endless stories, though. Suicides, ATV accidents, bears, attacks, which are very sad. Far too many Boy Scout violations to count. Poachers, murderers, public nudity, sex in parks, underage, everything you can imagine, life flight helicopters, forest fires, and air tankers, fire crews, enough said there, etc. But all in truly, I missed the million-acre office. The woods, the trees, animal encounters, the occasional well-informed forest visitors, and the endless views, vistas, and sunsets. Getting paid to hike, mountain bike, dirt bike, snowmobile, jeep, and play outside for 10 years was truly something I'll never forget. Anyways, I know my stories were more of stupid people than really creepiness, but I don't really want to go into the sadness of saying that I found dead bodies in the woods as typical people would. But hopefully the story was enjoyable nonetheless for you. So, I used to hear a ton of stories about ghosts and also watched a lot of horror movies. But since I had never experienced anything ghostly or anything like that, I never really knew if I believed them. One day, me and my two friends visited this spooky forest. It's not too nearby, but we managed to get there just to check it out, as we love the natural atmosphere. You know, giving my lungs some adrenaline and fresh air. The time we reached there was about 7 p.m., when it was already getting dark, and just to let you know, there's no light source in the forest except the entrance and exit of the forest area, so it was much darker than we expected. My friend had his Apple, and I had my Tab with dual flash, so we decided to use them, at least to see each other. An hour passed by, and we were having a conversation, and we were smoking some cigarettes. We were sitting under a tree, as it was thick enough for all of us to lay on our backs and just relax. We were having a good time, until we started hearing a weird sound. Like two rocks are being smashed into each other, or one rock smashing on the ground, again and again. We were pretty confused. I told my friends that it must be a cat trying to climb a tree, making the weak branches fall off, making a sound like the rock being hit. But it didn't stop for like 3 or 4 minutes though. Now after some minutes, it finally stopped for a while, and we were still assuming it was an animal doing these sounds. I've spent many times out in these state parks, and every time I do, we can usually explain these things. But this was little different. Things went silent for 5 minutes. We started our conversation about this forest atmosphere being so windy and cold. Then apparently, a rock fell on my friend's head. Wonder how a rock can be up there on a tree. Just in 4 to 5 seconds, a big branch from the tree fell on my lap, scaring the shit out of me. And once again, my friend felt like water drops falling on his neck. How was there still a chance of water dropping down from a tree when the rainy season was already over for 2 months? We haven't seen a lick of rain for weeks. This night was clearly not our lucky night, as we heard the same sound of the rock smash again. But now it sounds like it's getting closer. Immediately, without any options to choose, we decided to run out of the forest as quickly as we could. We left the forest safe and sound and headed to our homes. A few days after this incident, one of our friends posted a news about the same forest. There was a huge tower just like a lighthouse. As said by the post, we saw that tower from a distance but didn't get too close, as it was rocky area and it was too dangerous for us to go there at night. So in this post, a boy was passing by the tower, and the first thing he saw was a person, but only his head. The post also said the police couldn't find the body, but just the head of a man which was already found by the same person who said he saw it while passing by. But the question is, what happened to this guy? How in the world can this ever happen to someone? It can be the drug addicts who made this forest just to get high or something, but I don't think a drug addict would behead somebody. And the weird experience we had a few days ago in the same forest. Was this the same guy doing it after his death? Or maybe there's something else in the forest. My questions are yet to be answered, and I never visited that forest again. And neither did any of my friends. Here are a few details I think you should know. I am a pretty tall, well-built female, so not much scares me. I was 18 at the time this happened, and just a memory of this thing still gives me panic attacks. I was working as a seasonal maintenance worker at one of the parks in the Cherokee National Forest. Often, I would get to work before the rangers and other workers, so that I could take care of the rescue animals. I arrived to work while it was still pitch black outside. I had to open the gate before entering the area where the maintenance building and the animal cages were. I went inside to start my morning routine and prepare the animals' food. I didn't bother to turn on the light since plenty filtered in through the 2 full-length windows that faced towards the road and the others towards the cages, so there was plenty of light to see by. As I started getting the food ready, I began to get this sense of creepy unease. I took a look outside, but whatever was making me feel this way, all I could see was a little old woman with tan skin stumbling drunkenly down the road under the street lights. People walking these roads weren't that unusual, because there is a camping site down the road. Something was off. This little old lady, or man, or whatever it was, didn't seem quite right. Somehow, my unease kept growing as they came closer. Just as precaution, I locked the front door, which is solid steel, to keep people from stealing equipment. The front gate was open and the man stumbled through. Keeping the lights off, I ran to the back to make sure the door was locked as well. I sprinted back when I heard the fox and owls making the most distressing sounds I'd ever heard. I could see some frantically trying to get out of their cages while others hid. I thought it might be the old man at first, but what I saw crouching between the cages was something completely different. My unease had now turned into full-blown primal fear. Suddenly everything went completely silent. Then a voice that sounded like my boss, but not quite like him, One like someone trying to mimic the way he talked, called out, but I couldn't understand it. The thing began to come forward in a sort of lurch. Its eyes flinched open, and they were sickly green color. It seemed to glow like animals' eyes do when you shine a light on them in the dark. Then it dropped to all fours and started crawling like some demonic creature from a horror movie toward me. Had shaggy, matted fur and a canine-like appearance. But like if you had mixed it with a human and then hit it with a car, because it was just all so wrong. With a burst of speed, it stood up and slammed into the glass. Its breath fogged up the glass, and it must have stood a good 4 inches from my 5'9" frame. It wasn't huge, but at the time, it looked massive. I was frozen like a deer in the headlights, just staring at this thing. It unhinged its jaw, letting it hang loosely, and a strange voice that sounded a lot like my boss began pleading, "Maggie, open the door. I need your help." I backed up, feeling for the wrench that was just on the workbench. I was not going to take my eyes off this thing. In all my years of exploring these mountains, I have never seen anything like this creature. And no, I didn't think the wrench was going to do much against this thing. But what else was I supposed to do? It started, frantically saying, "Let me in. Help me." Each time the voice would change. Sometimes it would be my coworker. Other times it would be my family's voices. All I could think was I just don't know what I could think. I just didn't want this thing to come in here and kill me. I am not a religious person, but at the time I prayed for anyone to help me. I realized there was this foul stench of rotting meat in the air, and I had to fight, not to retch. The creature paced back and forth, clicking its teeth together, as it looked frustrated. Without warning, it rounded the corner, started violently yanking at the door and shrieking, "Let me in! Let me in!" It was the most horrifying thing I had ever seen. I was numb at this point, all ready to fight for my life. As quickly as it started, it stopped, and the horrible smell began to disappear. I looked out the window in time to see this thing scale the fence and cross the road, disappearing into the forest. Seconds later, my boss came to the little door and almost collapsed in relief. Taking the wrench from me and sitting me down, I told him what had happened. I thought he wouldn't believe me, but his wrinkled face just grew stern and concerned, and in a voice that was not to be questioned, he told me to never talk about this creature or it will draw its attention. To never speak of it. And lastly, to never invite it in. If I follow these rules, then I should be fine. He's not sure what drew the creature's attention that morning, but for the rest of my time working there, nothing like this happened again. Sometimes, when I'm on the back trails, I can hear voices or smell that overwhelming stench of death. But hopefully, I never see this thing again. These stories both happened to me over the past few years. My Boy Scout troop had been camping in historic Gettysburg, Pennsylvania for Memorial Day weekend, as it had been a tradition for our troop to go there and earn the 10-mile Hive Medal. We also did some sightseeing. Our Boy Scout troop visits every 4 years, and I had gone twice now already. On my first visit back in 2013, I had only stayed for 1 day because I had gotten sick, due to my stomach having a stomach bug that had been going around. Although, up to the moments that I had gotten sick, I swear I kept seeing things out of the corner of my eye. I know it may sound cheesy, but I swear I felt like I was being watched by something. Around lunchtime of that day, we had sat down on the benches and had lunch. Keep in mind, this is before I had gotten sick. I was sitting by myself, because I had only joined the troop about 4 months before we had gone to the Gettysburg trip, so I still didn't have many friends yet. As I was eating, I saw something quickly duck behind a bush in the tree line. Now, I know that it couldn't have been a person, because there was a lot of poison ivy in the woods, and our scoutmaster has specifically instructed us not to go near the woods and to avoid touching the plants. But when I saw something quickly tuck its head into the bushes the second I looked over at it, I felt an eerie feeling of dread for a while. We went to the visitor center of the park, and we also went into the gift shop. At this point, I was feeling terrible and just decided to sit down. The feeling got worse until I had quickly run outside and throw up into the trash can on the sidewalk. My scoutmaster asked if I wanted to go back to camp, so I agreed and went to my tent. At this point, it was 3 o'clock or so. I called for a ride home, but my family lives almost 2 hours away from Gettysburg, so they weren't exactly going to be getting me immediately. I decided to go to sleep in that time. When I woke up, my parents had showed up, and they just told me to rest in the car. I had gotten in the car and went on my way home. Before we left Gettysburg, as we went down the battlefield, I saw a mist from a certain patch of the window, right near where I had been resting my head. Then, that was it for my Gettysburg visit. Now fast forward 4 years to 2017. I was 16 at the time, and I was planning on trying to not get sick and enjoy the weekend. I didn't get sick this time, so I was able to see all the historical sites for the first time. But something unusual happened to some of my troop members one night. So, we decided it was a good idea to walk to the battlefield at night, just to see what it was like. I had agreed and went with 5 other members of the troop. By the time we walked from our campsite to the entrance of the battlefield, 2 of the guys decided to turn around because they were afraid of the park at night. So they headed back, leaving 3 of us. We walked into the battlefield, but only got about 50 yards in before we saw a huge rock get thrown from the road. This rock had to have been 40 to 50 pounds, so I can't explain how it was just showing up out of nowhere like that, other than someone from our troop throwing it. We decided not to stay, so we decided to run away from whoever or whatever tried throwing the rock at us. On our way back, we saw the 2 guys who had left us earlier. We ran right past them and all the way to our campsite. We asked if everyone was in the camp. We ran right past the only 2 people that weren't in the camp my scoutmaster told us. So, there was nobody from the camp that threw that rock, because nobody else left the camp, and the other 2 guys didn't even enter the battlefield, so it couldn't have been them. To this day, I think back on the situation. I don't believe it could have been possible for some bony-ass kid to throw a rock that big, far from the road to the battlefield. Sometimes, these stories cross my mind, but I really don't know what happened to me on both occasions of me visiting Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. A little background on the events I'm about to write about. This all happened in mid-October. My family owns about 160 acres of land in the middle of nowhere. Closest neighbor is a friend who let us rent the pasture for his cattle when he needs to. Some friends and I decided we wanted to build a little cabin out there, that we would hang out at it. So, one weekend, one of my friends and I loaded up a tractor we were renting from his dad and headed up out there. It was just me and him that weekend, as everyone else was busy. We got there a little late, since it took a while to get everything loaded and packed for the weekend. He sat about, setting up the tent, and I made our fire. As I did so, I made an odd discovery. There was a phone book from a few towns over, still in its plastic sleeve, right next to our fire pit. I picked it up and showed my friend. We both enjoyed scaring ourselves. I made the comment that, well, we aren't alone out here, and we both laughed at it. Later that night, we were setting up around the campfire, talking and BSing. There was a big bright moon that night, and a bit of breeze which made the whatever leaves were left rustle. It was a little creepy, but we enjoyed the atmosphere. We noticed, however, someone crossing through the middle of the field, their body just visible from the moonlight. At first, it was a little odd. My friend and I discussed for a few seconds if we should confront him, but I made the suggestion that he was probably just taking a shortcut across the field. Although I didn't really like it, it wasn't a huge deal. If we caught him doing it again, then we would confront him, we decided. The rest of the night passed pretty uneventfully. We eventually got in our tent and laid down. We were probably 20 or so feet in the fire pit, which was by that point burning quite low. We talked for a few minutes, and then we go silent, trying to fall asleep. As we're laying there, we hear something. It sounded like quiet footsteps walking around the fire pit. We both look at each other, silent. Then we hear a piece of wood getting thrown into the fire, and it flamed up quite a bit. I grabbed the shotgun I always kept in a tent and quickly racked it. We then heard someone run away, but by the time we got out, they were too far. The rest of the weekend was pretty quiet, and the events of the first night seemed kind of dreamy to us. We just cleared the area for the cabin and cut the stacked trees and cut them for the firewood. Next weekend, we get out there, but Uncle was out there as well. We went to check his game cams. This is where it got much more worrying for us. But Uncle told us he was pissed because someone had stolen the batteries and SD cards out of the cameras. We told him about what happened the weekend before, and then parted ways. When we got out there, we noticed that quite a bit of our wood had been cut and stacked, or it was already gone. And we were the last people to camp out there, which means someone had come out of there and taken ourselves. When we went and checked the tractor, which we had left down there, we found it broken into, and the chainsaw which we had left had been stolen. To make a long story short, nothing else so far has happened. I was hesitant for a few weeks to continue with the cabin, since we weren't there all the time. I was worried if it would be an incentive for whoever was there to stay. I'm not sure if it was transient or local or who. If, for some reason, anything else happened, I'll definitely update. I'm doing seasonal work out in Olympic National Park this summer, and I live in the employee housing on the same property as my job. Throughout the summer, I have heard things like a giggle come from my empty room and a sliding glass door close on its own. One night, about a month ago, something wild happened. The building I live in is backed up against an impenetrable coastal rainforest, and some friends and I were sitting in one of the apartment units, chatting, when we all noticed screaming coming from the woods. Initially, we thought it was a cougar, but it kept going and was decidedly human-sounding. Sometimes, it seemed more like sobbing, and in other moments, it was frantic yelling. It went on for about 5 intense minutes, then stopped. Now, the truly terrifying part, about 30 seconds after the yelling stopped, was sounded like a disembodied woman's voice was coming through a radio, started muttering right next to where we were sitting. We couldn't make out what she was saying, and it only lasted a few seconds. It was in the room with us, but we couldn't see anything. One of my friends opened the door to make sure there was nobody outside, and we were completely alone. It should also be noted that everyone who lives in the building were all in the same room, so all of us and all the other units were empty. All of us who live there are puzzled. We don't have any logical explanation for what could have happened, and just can't seem to find one. But I'll tell you what, the Olympic National Park is very haunted. When I was 18, I spent a lot of time in the Cohutta Wilderness. My favorite spot was a set of waterfalls, several miles from the nearest parking area. Most visitors just parked in the RV area and swam in the creek right along the gravel road. In the 2 years I hiked those trails, I never saw anyone further than a half mile into the trail. Anyway, one Saturday, I took my girlfriend to see the waterfalls since she had never seen one in person before. We set off on the trail, and not 15 minutes into the walk, she grabbed my arm and got quiet, and said she felt like she was being watched and had the heebie-jeebies. I assured her everything was safe. The only thing I'd ever have to worry about in my part of the woods are the occasional bear or copperhead. We continued on, but she could never shake the feeling of being watched. I just figured she wasn't used to the wilderness and was having trouble adjusting. A couple of hours later, we finally reached the end of the trail and had a picnic at the bottom of the falls. After we finished eating, she tried to check her cell phone for messages and started to panic when she realized we had no service. I explained to her that there was no cell reception anywhere around for miles, that we are finally alone and can enjoy the peace and solitude, which of course made her panic. We started heading back almost immediately because she was clearly scared, and I couldn't help but smile, thinking it was silly. On the way back, I explained to her how many times I'd been out here all alone and never had any problems, but she still couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. We were about a mile from the falls, on the only trail around, when we heard someone call from behind. I jumped nearly out of my skin and turned to see a man walking toward us. He had a rifle slung over his shoulder and a heavy beard with his hat tipped low. She took a small step behind me. "What can I do for ya?" I asked, trying to sound friendly. "You guys left your cell phone back by the falls," he said. I saw a slight grin behind his beard as he looked at my girlfriend. "Oh, thanks for the assist," I said, extending my hand. He shook his head and told me he didn't bring it, and that it was still sitting up there, and maybe we should follow him back up there to get it ourselves. We politely declined and made our way back down the trail as quickly as we could with him, following us on the trail several feet behind. He followed us all the way back to our car, and she sold me her cell phone when I opened the door. I haven't been back to that particular trail ever since. Cedar Hill State Park is a beautiful place with serene views and nature for miles. I work as a ranger for the park, but my job more specifically is to lead guided hikes with visitors. One particular day, I had a family of 4 join me for the day. We take periodic stops on the hike to view and photograph one of the 200 species of bird that live there. Well, after hiking for about 2 miles, we came across a prairie where there was not 1, but 2 mutilated raccoons. Thinking it was strange, but not trying to freak the group out, I mentioned it was most likely a bobcat or coyote kill. We continued on, thinking nothing of it. About 100 feet away from where we found the bodies, we noticed tons of weird carvings in the trees. They were like symbols of some sort. I'm not one to claim I know everything about anything, but these symbols looked awfully close to those you would see on Masonic buildings. I was starting to get this feeling of unease and was thinking of bringing this hike to a close, when I also began to notice that everything was silent. No noises from the birds, bugs, or anything else that would be living in the area. And at this point, I knew something was wrong and turned the group around. I found a point that I felt wouldn't look sketchy so they wouldn't get worried. On our way back, one of the children from the group began mentioning he was seeing a shadow from the corner of his eye. I tried to assure him that it was just a squirrel or something from his peripherals. After what felt like hours, but was no longer than 30 minutes, we emerged from where we started. I looked back behind us, and I swear, I saw a shadow of something big walking back the way we came from. To this day, I really don't know what that was. Maybe it was just my imagination freaking me out more than I already was, but I still can't explain it. And now, I'm definitely extra vigilant when I'm on hikes. I was on a cadet weekend, 6 or so years ago at that Thetford training ground. It has been a training ground for a good century, and has a lot of history in the area. I had a really good time, but a few slightly weird things happened, which no one was able to explain. No large native animals, other than the odd fox or badger, but they tend to steer generally clear due to the nature of the exercises. It's the military, so it involves gunfire. It's quite diverse landscape for England, with open spaces, pine trees with large open clearings, and shrubs dotting across the place. 5 of us cadets were on patrol through the pine-covered areas on the outskirts of a big, plain clearing. It's around 3 square kilometers. Only distinguishable feature was a large mound in the middle of this clearing. Anyway, one of us shouts, "Stand to!" and in excitement and slight confusion as to what he could have seen, we all eagerly take a position. We laid our pointing rifles in the same direction as everyone else, looking for the threat. NCO then tells us how he saw a figure moving at top of the mound and that it was probably the sergeant testing us. So we vigilantly go over low and behold, there is no one there. Remember the NCO, who was only 16 and I was 13 at the time, being very creeped out. 13-year-old me was slightly amused, but mainly just ecstatic at being out in the woods. No adults and with rifles. No magazines though, so it was kinda pointless. Could he have been fucking with us? Of course. But something tells me he probably wasn't. Later on, we set up camp in a lightly forested area and got on some sentry duties. I took one of the first watches and felt very creeped out, as if I was being watched. I had my rifle with me, giving me a weird sense of confidence, so I brushed it off and lay there for a few hours. Later on in the night, another sentry orders stand came towards us. We all hear rustling in the bushes. Pretty loud, and we're all a bit spooked. The adults go and investigate and come back telling us it's a rogue sheep from a nearby farm. One of the adults told me later that she's always found that ground to be creepy. This woman is pretty fucking tough as nails and never appeared to be scared by much, but admitted that she once was walking to the camp at night and swore she was being followed by footsteps and stopped when hers did. She never really took any jokes and did not have much of a sense of humor, but still, maybe she was fucking with us all along and this was an elaborate prank. However, she was not the sort to do the ha-has. It's not essentially creepy, but still slightly out of the norm. A lot of creepy noises and things happened in that small set of woods. But those stories are for another day.